It was supposed to be one of the most important mornings of my life. I had been waiting weeks for this meeting at my quiet lake cabin, a private sit-down with the state attorney general to finally go over the stack of evidence I had collected against my homeowners association. The whole case had been brewing for months: unfair fines, threats over property rights, and endless harassment from the whole board. I thought I had found the perfect safe place to meet, tucked away by the water, away from prying eyes and neighborhood drama. What I didn't count on was that trouble would find me anyway. Just as I was laying out the documents on the table, making sure everything was in order, there came a sharp, pounding knock at the door. At first, I thought it was a delivery or maybe even a ranger from the park. But when I opened it, there she was, Karen, the loudest, most controlling member of the... She had stormed all the way up to my cabin, uninvited, her voice already raised before I could even say a word. She barged past me like she owned the place, pointing fingers and spitting accusations about violations that made no sense. The timing couldn't have been worse, because right behind me, just a few steps away, the Attorney General himself was standing, calmly watching this whole scene unfold. My heart sank. I had worked so hard to get this meeting, and now it felt like everything could unravel in seconds. Karen didn't even notice who she was interrupting, at least, not yet. And when she finally realized, the look on her face could have changed everything. What happened next? Well, that's where the story really begins. Karen froze for a moment when she finally noticed the man standing in the corner. The Attorney General didn't flinch. He simply folded his hands and studied her, almost as if he'd seen this kind of scene 100 times before. Meanwhile, I felt like the ground had been pulled out from under me. This meeting had taken months to arrange, and now it was being hijacked right in front of my eyes by the very person who had caused most of my problems with the HOA. To understand why this moment carried so much weight, you need to know the history. The HOA in my neighborhood wasn't just strict, it was suffocating. They fined me for things as small as leaving a canoe tied to my dock, claimed my cabin porch was too rustic for the community's standards, and even sent warnings about the color of my mailbox. I had tried to resolve things the polite way, but every time I pushed back, Karen made sure the board doubled down. She seemed to thrive on confrontation, and for reasons I never quite understood, she had singled me out. That's why I started gathering records, letters, photos, and even testimonies from neighbors who had quietly admitted they'd been targeted too. When the Attorney General's office finally agreed to hear me out, I thought it was my chance to expose how deep this had gone. And now, of all people, Karen had marched right into the middle of it, waving her arms and demanding to know why I was breaking HOA rules by hosting a meeting at my own cabin. The silence in the room grew heavy. Karen hadn't pieced it all together yet, but the moment she realized exactly who she was interrupting, everything shifted in a way none of us expected. Karen's face shifted from anger to confusion as her eyes darted between me and the man in the suit. She clearly hadn't expected anyone else to be there, let alone someone with authority. But instead of backing down, she puffed up even more, raising her voice about community violations and accusing me of hiding something at the cabin. I could feel the tension coil tighter with every word, because what she didn't realize was that her accusations weren't just noise anymore. They were being heard by the one person with the power to investigate everything she and the HOA had been doing. The Attorney General remained calm, almost too calm, as if he were taking mental notes of every word. He finally asked Karen a simple question: "And what exactly gives you the right to enter this property uninvited?" That stopped her cold, but only for a moment. She launched into her usual spiel about HOA bylaws, claiming the board had oversight over any property in the community. To her, those rules were gospel. To me, they were the chains I had been fighting to break. The irony was that she had just walked right into the heart of the case. She didn't know about the stack of files on the table or the stories from other homeowners who had been bullied into silence. Some had been forced to pay thousands in bogus fines, while others quietly sold their homes just to get away. A few neighbors had confided in me late at night, saying they felt powerless, but they were too afraid of retaliation to speak up. Now, standing in my cabin, Karen was unknowingly giving the Attorney General a front row seat to the exact kind of overreach and intimidation I had been describing. But what he would do with this moment, none of us knew yet. Karen's voice grew sharper as she circled the cabin like she owned it, jabbing her finger toward the porch, the dock, even the stack of folders on the table. Each word spilled out faster than the last, her tone dripping with the same authority she had wielded over the neighborhood for years. My chest tightened because I knew those files weren't just papers. They were the very proof of everything the Ho had done in secret. If she caught even a glimpse of what was inside, the entire case could be at risk. The Attorney General still hadn't moved from his spot, but his eyes followed her closely, as if he were measuring every step and every reckless statement. He didn't interrupt. He didn't even raise his voice. The silence from his end made the tension unbearable. It was like waiting for a storm to break while the thunder rumbled just out of sight. I could feel the weight of every story I carried from my neighbors pressing down on me. The retired couple who lost their savings over repeated landscaping violations. The single mom fined until she had to sell her home. And here was Karen, standing in my cabin, unknowingly laying their struggles bare through her arrogance. The moment she stopped at the table, her eyes narrowing at the folders, my pulse spiked. Her hand hovered near the evidence, like she might snatch it up just to prove some point. I stepped forward instinctively, blocking her path, but that only made her raise her voice louder, accusing me of hiding illegal activities from the Ho. That was it, the breaking point. The air felt electric, the cabin too small to contain what was about to happen. Karen had pushed too far, and the Attorney General finally shifted forward. The entire room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for what would come next. Just as the Attorney General took that deliberate step forward, the sound of tires crunching over gravel echoed from outside. At first, I thought it might be another neighbor, maybe someone curious about the commotion. But when I glanced through the window, my stomach dropped. Two SUVs had pulled up near the cabin, and out stepped none other than two more members of the whole board. It was as if they had been tipped off, or worse, had been following me. Karen's face lit up with smug relief the moment she saw them. "Good," she snapped. "Now you'll see I'm not the only one who thinks you're breaking the rules." Her tone carried the confidence of someone who believed backup had just arrived, ready to put me in my place. But what she didn't realize was how much more dangerous this had just become. The board members strode inside without hesitation, one holding a clipboard stacked with papers, the other already muttering about unauthorized meetings on Ho property. My hands tightened at my sides, because I knew those documents were part of the HOA's scare tactics, phony violation notices, and trumped-up fines they used to pressure homeowners. And now, right in the middle of my meeting with the Attorney General, they were throwing them on the table as if they were evidence against me. The tension in the room shot through the roof. Karen looked emboldened. The board members were bristling with authority, and yet the Attorney General remained quiet, his expression unreadable. For the first time, I couldn't tell who held the upper hand. All I knew was that the case I had worked so hard to build was now colliding head-on with the very people I was fighting against. And in that moment, it felt like the outcome could swing either way. The room felt like it was about to explode. Karen stood at my shoulder, the board members crowding the doorway, their papers spread across the table like weapons. They spoke over one another, throwing out accusations about violations, fines, and community rules. For a second, I thought the Attorney General would simply leave, that the chaos had ruined everything. But then, he calmly raised a hand. The entire cabin went silent. He stepped forward and picked up one of the so-called violation notices. His eyes scanned it, and then another, and then the files I had prepared. Without raising his voice, he said, "What I'm seeing here is very concerning. These aren't rules being enforced. This looks like intimidation." Karen's mouth fell open. The board members stiffened, their confidence faltering. In one sweeping moment, the balance shifted. All their bluster, all the years of unchecked power, suddenly looked flimsy under his gaze. I could feel my heart pounding as he turned toward them, laying out questions they couldn't answer. Why fines were inconsistent, why only certain homeowners were targeted, why board members seemed exempt from their own rules. For the first time, Karen had nothing to say. The silence was louder than any shouting match we'd ever had. Then came the twist I never expected. The Attorney General turned back to me, not with reassurance, but with a warning. "You've uncovered something much bigger than your cabin or this hoe," he said. "If these documents are accurate, this could involve fraud on a statewide level." The cabin suddenly felt colder. What started as a fight to protect my little piece of lakefront property had just opened the door to something far larger, something that would drag every single one of us into a storm none of us were prepared for. The air inside the cabin was still heavy as the Attorney General gathered the papers into a neat stack. Karen and the board members shifted uneasily, their earlier bravado completely drained. No one dared to speak. For once, the silence didn't feel like defeat. It felt like the beginning of something bigger than all of us. The Attorney General promised a full investigation, explaining that his office would review every single fine, notice, and bylaw that had been enforced. He told Karen and the others that until the review was complete, any further action by the HOA would be subject to scrutiny. It was the first time I saw Karen without a quick retort. Her face, usually sharp with anger, was pale and uncertain. The board members collected their clipboards and quietly excused themselves, their authority suddenly meaningless in the face of real accountability. Watching them leave my cabin, I realized just how much of their power had been built on fear, and how quickly that power vanished when someone finally stood up to it. When the door closed, the Attorney General looked at me and said, "This isn't over. But what you did here, gathering the truth and refusing to back down, made it possible to shine a light on all of this." His words hit harder than I expected. For months, I had felt like I was fighting alone. Now, it finally seemed like the tide was turning. In the weeks that followed, the HOA could no longer operate unchecked. Neighbors who had been silent for years began to share their stories, realizing they weren't alone. The fear was fading, replaced by something stronger: unity. Looking out over the lake that evening, I knew my cabin wasn't just my refuge anymore. It had become the place where the fight for fairness began, and that made every struggle worth it.